Hey everybody, Pastor Craig here giving you your devotional this morning. And we're real excited because we got a lot of big events coming up. So Good Friday tomorrow, we've got online services at 5 and 7. And it's going to be a really powerful time for you and your family to celebrate communion together and for us to do that as a church as well. And so I hope to see you there. Also on Sunday, we'll be having services this week for Easter at 9, 10, and 11. And so we're excited about that and what God's going to do there as we celebrate some baptisms and people going public with their faith, as well as celebrating Jesus and his resurrection. Today, though, I want to talk to you about another part of Holy Week called Maundy, Thursday. And I just want to tackle, what is it? What was Jesus teaching us in it? And how do we apply this to our life? Some people call Maundy, Thursday, Holy Thursday. But Maundy is not exactly a term that you're probably throwing around in your everyday life, right? Especially apart from Easter. But Maundy is actually a Latin term that comes from the word mandatum, and it means, or is translated as commandment. And so literally it is Command Thursday. And that's because what we're celebrating on Maundy, Thursday are really two big things. The first is the communion that Jesus celebrates as part of that Passover meal with his disciples. It becomes something that becomes instituted and that we still celebrate today as Jesus institutes this as a main part of what followers of his are going to do. But the other thing we're celebrating is Jesus' servant leadership act of washing his disciples' feet. And so, but the history of this event is all tied back to the Jewish Passover. The Passover where God's hand led his people out of Egypt, out of bondage, out of slavery, and that happened through the blood of an unblemished lamb, because that death angel would pass over their doorposts as part of the plagues that God used there in Egypt to set them free. So the context of Holy Week is this command that Jesus gave his disciples about being a servant. So I want to start with the command, and then let's go back and look at the context a little bit more. So if you have your Bibles, let's open them together. John chapter 13 is where we're going to be at. And the command is found in verses 34 and 35. Here's where it says, Jesus says, I give you a new command. Love one another just as I have loved you. You are also to love one another. And by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. You see, the text here is an important one because Jesus here sets the tone. And part of Holy Week ties back to this command, right? Love one another. So let's go back, though, and look at, how did we get here? What was the context leading up to this? Because Jesus is like a master teacher. And so he's not going to be content just telling us what the command is. He goes back and powerfully illustrates it for his disciples so that this could be a defining moment in their lives that would maybe change the purpose of their lives as Jesus gives this new command. So jump back with me to John 13, starting and looking at verse 1. Here's what it says there. It says, before the Passover festival, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. So it starts telling us the context here. You see, it was the Passover festival was just going to be celebrated later on that evening. He was going to celebrate it with his disciples. It's a moment we all remember well. Jesus here knew that his moment was going to be done on this earth soon. And it says that he loved those in the world that were his and also his disciples, his followers. And it's painting a picture for us here that he lived out this command. So let's keep going, though, because Jesus wasn't content there. He keeps going. Verse 2. Now when it was time for supper, the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, Simon Iscariot's son, to betray him. Jesus knew that the Father had given everything into his hands, that he had come from God, and that he was going back to God. So he got up from supper, laid aside his outer clothing, he took a towel, tied it around himself, and next he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet and to dry them with a towel he had around him. You see, as a reminder of this commandment, some churches still hold foot washing ceremonies. And if you've never been a part of this, it's an incredibly humbling thing to be a part of, to have someone wash your feet. I remember getting married. I took my wife, and on our honeymoon night, I had a basin set up there, and I washed her feet, right? I knew God calls me as her husband to lead her, but I also knew God called me as her husband to serve her. And it's an incredibly humbling, incredibly intimate thing to be a part of. And it would have been difficult for the disciples to allow Jesus, the one who's the King of Kings, right? The Lord of Lords, the Messiah that them and their parents and grandparents had been looking forward to for generations, and now to let that King of Kings wash their feet, something that was a job for a servant, a job for a hired hand, and to let Jesus do that for them was something that was very difficult. In the following verses here in John 13, you see some different responses here. Peter's first response is like, no way. Like, Jesus, you can't wash my feet. Like, you're the one I'm following. You can't serve me this way. And sometimes I think we feel that way with Jesus, right? We feel like, man, Jesus, like, you're the master of everything. Surely you're too busy for little old me. But Jesus responds to him, and look at what he says here. It's in verse 7. He says, what I'm doing you don't realize now, but afterwards you're going to understand. Peter says, you'll never wash my feet. And Jesus replied, if I don't wash you, then you'll have no part with me. You see, Jesus responds to Peter and says, hey, listen, I know you might feel self-conscious about this. You might feel awkward. But if I don't cleanse you, then you can't have a part in my kingdom. You can't have a share in what I'm doing. And now Peter responds to this in typical Peter fashion. He says, well, if that's true, then wash all of me, Jesus. Like, wash my head, wash my hands. And Jesus says, no. Like, I've cleansed you, but you still need to see this. You still need me to wash your feet. And so Peter reluctantly accepts and allows Jesus to cleanse him. What's also amazing to me is Judas is there. And it tells us in the text, Jesus knew Judas was going to betray him. But still, Jesus washes his feet. Washes the feet of the one who would betray him. It's a personal thing. And it's a good reminder for me that even when you and I are at our worst, Jesus still came to serve us. He came to be the atonement for us, the one who would take our place, who would take our punishment, even in our worst moments. You see, this thing is never about us being good enough to measure up. It's always been about Jesus and his goodness covering our sin. Jesus gives us freedom from whatever holds us in slavery, whatever holds us in bondage. He washes the sinfulness out of our filthy lives so that once again we can live in freedom, so that we can exist free from bondage and slaveries to the evil of this world and the sin in our own hearts. And these hands that would wash their feet are not just, this wasn't just a kind act or a humble act of forgiveness. The hands that would wash the disciples' feet are a sign, are a statement, a sacrament, a command of how you and I are supposed to live. It was a visible action tied to this new command that you and I should love one another just as Jesus loved us. There's nobody that's beneath us serving them. We're never too high to care for and to lay our lives down for people around us, to live with humility each and every day. So maybe you're here though and you're asking like, hey, listen, I'm under quarantine, I'm under stay-at-home orders. Like, how do I serve people around me? Listen, I think this is a tremendous time to do that. Your humility will never be more tested than living in a house with some people over the next 30 or 45 days, right? Nobody's going away for work, right? It tests you. I challenge you to rise up in this time to be a servant for your family, to find ways to praise them, to speak encouragement into their lives, to text an encouraging note to someone in a church or to a neighbor. One of the things my family and I are going to be doing on Easter is we picked up a couple of those Easter egg bags from the church, and we're going to go Easter morning and we're going to put eggs out in some of our neighbors' lawns that have kids, and just surprise them with that as an act of service, of caring for them and their family, knowing they can't get out to do that stuff, so we'll bring the party to them. And we're going to invite them, right, to be a part of us, to jump online, because we want them more than anything to hear the gospel of Jesus and to experience freedom. How about you? What's a way you can find to serve people around you, in your family, in your neighborhood, or in your church body? I hope you can find a way to do that this week. Happy Maundy, Thursday. Let's live out that new command and love one another today. God bless you. Take care.